afternoon, everyone, all of us, so many of us. It's so great to see so many people here. My name is Chandra Hodgson. I'm a professor in liberal arts and sciences and a member of the President's Lecture Series Committee. On behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome everyone who's come today to hear our third guest speaker of the year, Wanda Morris, who will deliver a lecture entitled Talking About Dying Won't Kill You, The Case for Choice at the End of Life. Before we introduce Ms. Morris, I'd like to thank all of those people whose work has made the lecture series possible. The committee members, Angela Auschla, Melanie Shaparian, Ian Gary, and Jeff Bull. Also, Humber's media services technicians, the president's executive assistant, Deborah Green, and of course, Humber's president, Chris Whitaker, whom we would like to thank for his continuing support of the lecture series. I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight some of the talks we've had so far this year and also give you a preview of what's coming next. On Tuesday, October 1st, we heard from filmmaker, educator, and eco-activist Shalina Kantaya, who delivered a talk entitled A Drop of Life Inside the Mounting Water Crisis. That was at the North Campus Lecture Theatre. On Wednesday, October 30th, we heard from author and Globe and Mail columnist Doug Saunders, who delivered a talk entitled The Next 2 Billion Urbanites, How the Worst Neighborhoods Are the World's Best Hope. That one was at the Lakeshore campus in the community room. And still to come, on Wednesday, January 29th, at noon, we'll hear author and executive director of the Stop Community Food Center, Nick Saul. He'll deliver a talk entitled Food Justice, Food Citizenship. And that's going to be back at the Lakeshore campus in the community room in the L building. On Thursday, February 27th at 1 p.m., we will hear from Dr. Tricia Rose, who is an author and professor at Brown University, as well as the director of the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America. She's going to talk about race and ethnicity in popular culture. This one will take place at the North Campus again in the 7th semester. And to finish off our series for the year, on Tuesday, March 18th at noon, we will hear Harvard Graduate School of Education Ed.D. candidate and researcher on Native populations, Adrienne Keene. She's going to deliver a lecture entitled Native Representations, Pop Culture, and Cultural Resistance in Cyberspace. And that will, again, be in this room at the North Campus. Details about our lectures are always posted in the communique, on Humber's website, Humber TV, HSF bulletin boards, and we can even be found on the event pages of Facebook, Google+, and we are now on Twitter with the handle @HumberPLS. It's great to see so many different members of the Humber community here and our broader community here today, professors, support staff, administrators, and of course, students. I'd like to extend a special welcome to everyone watching or listening via livecast at Lakeshore and Orangeville. And I'd like to extend an extra special welcome to General Arts and Sciences students in Ian Gary's Contemporary Moral Issues class, as well as Carolyn Vrenicek's, I hope I said that right, students from Martin Grove Collegiate participating in the Specialist High Skills Major program. Please silence your cell phones. If you do have to leave early for a 1:35 class, please exit as quietly as possible. As you listen to the lecture, don't forget to jot down questions. There will be a Q&A session afterwards. It's going to be live cast, so we're going to need you to speak into the microphone, which is why we have one set up in the middle of the room there. And if you need the microphone brought to you, we can also arrange that. I'd now like to turn the floor over to Justin Phillips, a General Arts and Sciences student who will introduce our speaker.
Wanda Morris is the Executive Director of Dying with Dignity Canada, a national charity formed over 30 years ago to improve the quality of dying for Canadians and expand their end-of-life choices. It is a position that she has held since 2010. Before joining the staff of Dying with Dignity Canada, Ms. Morris was active in the Dying with Dignity movement and volunteered with the organization for many years. She presented to the Parliamentary Committee on Palliative and Compassionate Care, an all-party group of MPs that issued policy recommendations concerning end-of-life care for Canadians. She also provided testimony in the landmark BC Supreme Court case in which Gloria Taylor, who suffered from ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, was among the plaintiffs who challenged the constitutionality of the ban on physician-assisted death and won. a decision that was subsequently overturned by the BC Court of Appeal. Ms. Morris is a chartered accountant and has 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Commerce, and a Master's in Transforming Spirituality. She has held senior financial positions in both business and not-for-profit organizations. She's a former member of the Canadian Association for Professional Speakers and a professional speaking coach. I'm sure we all are very eager to hear her speak with us today, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ms. Wanda Morris.
I've come undone. Can everyone hear me? Did we recover from that? If you had cancer, or if I had ALS, should we be able to ask a doctor to assist us to end our lives? If we faced a grim future with prolonged suffering, should we be able to ask someone to help us so that we didn't have to play that tape out to the very end? This is the question at the heart of my question: should medically assisted dying be legalized in Canada? The question, or the answer, actually starts many years ago in a different context, with our rights. As Canadians, we have certain fundamental rights from our healthcare system, and one of those is the right of informed consent. There is not one procedure, one exam, one diagnostic test that can be done to us without our agreeing to it. We have to understand exactly what the test is, what the likely outcome is, what the side effects are likely to be. And then we have to consent in order for that test to proceed. Our healthcare legislation is determined either provincially through Parliament or in some cases through the common law, through the courts. In Quebec in 1992, there was a woman who's described in the press as Nancy B, a synonym. Nancy B's story started in 1989 when she contracted a disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And Guillain-Barré syndrome, in its extreme form, which she had, paralyzes an individual. She was so paralyzed that even her respiratory functions had shut down. She was kept alive by being on a respirator. In 1992, the courts in Quebec heard her case. She asked for the right to have that respirator removed. Her doctors had refused. They said, if we take you off the respirator, we'll be killing you. We can't do that. We can't kill you. We can't be complicit in your death. She took her case to the courts in Quebec, and she won. She won a fundamental decision, which we all have as Canadians in every province, the right to refuse a treatment, or if the treatment has already started, the right to stop that treatment. In her case, the respirator was removed, and as everyone had foreseen, she died. Another court case happened in Ontario, not far from here, in Hamilton. There was a very serious car accident. 3 people were killed at the scene. The survivor was rushed to a nearby hospital, where immediately plans were made for emergency surgery. Mrs. Millette had lost a lot of blood. She needed a blood transfusion. While the hospital staff were preparing to do the transfusion, one of them looked through her wallet and found a card. The card said, "I am a Jehovah's Witness. I would not want a blood transfusion. I do not want a blood transfusion under any circumstances, even if it means it will end my life." Dr. Schulman saw the card and said, "It's signed, but it's not dated. We don't know that that's current. She's not able to speak for herself. She's at risk of death. We need to do the blood transfusion. Please proceed." Millette's daughter then came to the hospital and said, "My mother is a Jehovah's Witness. She would not want a blood transfusion under any circumstances." The doctor repeated, "Your mother is not able to speak for herself. We must proceed. It's a matter of life and death." And they proceeded and they saved her life. And she recovered. And she recovered so well that 6 months later, she was able to sue the hospital for battery, which she did. She sued the hospital for battery and she won. And the hospital appealed that case and she won the appeal. Not only do we have the right to make decisions to stop or withdraw from treatment, but we have the right to designate a substitute decision maker to make that decision on our behalf. Imagine that you are at the end of life and suffering grievously, whether it's uncontrollable pain from cancer, or perhaps you're just continually nauseous and can't stop vomiting 24 hours a day. Or maybe your body is overcome with itching. Sometimes pain can't be treated by medication. In that case, what our medical system can do is put you into a coma. They can render you unconscious if consciousness is too painful of a place for you to be. Palliative sedation is where you are put into a coma as a means of relief from extreme pain or suffering. Terminal palliative sedation happens when you're in a coma and artificial food and hydration is removed. You then die from dehydration. This is currently legal in Canada, and not only can you be given this on your own consent, you can be given this on the consent of your substitute decision maker. In 1972, we had a prime minister by the name of Pierre Trudeau, and he famously said, "The government has no place in the bedrooms of the nation." He also, perhaps less well known, decriminalized something that up until that point had been a criminal offense. He decriminalized Section 241A of the Canadian Criminal Code, which said that it is illegal to commit suicide. Now, granted, if you were successful in an attempt to commit suicide, it was very hard to prosecute. But it had had very real implications for people who had attempted unsuccessfully and found themselves faced with imprisonment. So he deleted that part of the criminal code. And since 1972, it has been legal for Canadians to end their own life. But here we have a really interesting anomaly. It's legal for you to end your life, but it's illegal for someone to assist you. Can you imagine a perfectly legal act that you can do, but to help you do it, a person who helps you is at risk for being charged under Section 241B or C of the Criminal Code and faces up to 14 years in prison. There is only one other example in Canada of an act that is legal to do but illegal to assist. Does anyone know what that is? It is prostitution. And interestingly, we have a case headed to the Supreme Court on that, which will probably give us some telling information about this one. So where are we going with this? We are proposing medically assisted dying for people that are sick and dying, suffering grievously at the end of life. We believe they should have the right to humane assistance if this is what they truly want, and if a doctor or a medical person under a doctor's supervision wants to help them. This is a face that some of you may recognize. In 1993, Sue Rodriguez was a woman with ALS. ALS is a very cruel disease. It attacks the muscles of the body while leaving the brain perfectly intact. So somebody with it will maybe have first symptoms of dropping things. They find their grip is disappearing. Eventually, they start to notice they can't reach where they used to. They can't scratch the back of their neck, can't feed themselves. Eventually, they will end up in a wheelchair, and if they don't die of another cause, will lie in bed and drown in their own secretions because their lung muscles refuse to function. Now, Sue Rodriguez had the right, as all Canadians do, to end her life. She also had a 9-year-old son. She didn't want to leave one day too early. So she asked the courts, and she said, if I was able-bodied, I could end my life. But I have a disability. Our Canadian Charter protects people with disabilities. It says that there is no grounds for discrimination based on age or sex or mental or physical disability. So she took her case, and ultimately it went to the Supreme Court of Canada in 1993. And there, 9 members of the Supreme Court heard the decision, and in a 5-4 split decision, they ruled against her. Sue Rodriguez had famously asked, who owns my life? Who owns my life? And the courts had said, not you. Now, they agreed with her that her rights were being violated on what's called Section 15 of the Charter, the right not to be discriminated against. But they overruled her rights in that case under Section 1 of the Charter, which basically says that an individual has certain rights, but those have to be weighed in the balance against the rights of all society. And we cannot give an individual a right if doing so puts members of society at risk. And so Justice Sapinka, in his decision for the majority, said, nowhere else in the Western world is this legal. Canadians don't support it. Doctors don't support it. Canada will not be the first. And in that 5-4 decision, Sue Rodriguez did not get support to die. Interestingly, a recent poll of Supreme Court decisions over the last 30 years shows that as the most unpopular decision the Supreme Court has made. Put another way, Sue's decision was really about choice. Just going to show you momentarily a brief ad from
Life's
Australia.
all about choices. Like, I chose to go to uni and study engineering. While I was there, I chose to drink and generally have a bloody good time. I chose to marry Tina, have 2 great kids. I chose to always drive a Ford. Chose this shirt. Even chose this haircut. What I didn't choose was being terminally ill. I didn't choose to starve to death because eating is like swallowing razor blades. And I certainly didn't choose to have to watch my family go through it with me. I've made my final choice.
This is another face that many of you will recognize. This is a woman by the name of Gloria Taylor. And in BC, she took a case to the BC Supreme Court asking for the courts to overturn the decision in Rodriguez and to give her the right to medical assistance to die. Now, Gloria Taylor, as all Canadians, had the right to end her own life. But she had ALS. She also had an 11-year-old granddaughter. She didn't want to go one day too early. And so she asked the courts in BC to please hear the case. As Sue Rodriguez, she asked under Section 15 of the Charter because of a discrimination based on disability. She also asked under Section 7 of the Charter, which says that all Canadians have the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. In the court evidence that was presented, the case was made, how can Gloria have security of her person when she doesn't have the right to choose whether or not she lives or dies? So the court decision was made by Justice Lynn Smith, who was a constitutional law expert, previously had taught at UBC, the University of British Columbia. To give you some perspective on how things had changed in 20 years, in 1993, the evidence in the Sue Rodriguez case was a binder. It was one binder. In the Gloria Taylor case, it was a bookcase of binders. Because what we've had in the 20 years since Sue Rodriguez is 8 jurisdictions around the world that have legalized medical assistance to die. And it's been perhaps the most studied healthcare legislation ever written. Do the safeguards work? What's the experience? Are the weak and vulnerable at risk? So the BC Supreme Court, in their decision, Justice Smith, it was a real victory for those of us who support end-of-life choice. Justice Smith ruled under both Section 7 and Section 15 that Canadians should have the right to medical assistance to die. And what's more, she gave Gloria Taylor a particular exemption. So are we having a problem with sound? Do you want me to move the microphone? Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. What she also did, not only overturned the previous decision in Rodriguez, but also ruled that Gloria Taylor, who had taken this case to court, who was a woman who was at end of life and who had used her final months of life energy to bring this case to court, that she should be rewarded for that by being given a particular exemption. So Gloria Taylor got a special court exemption, and she became the first Canadian to be given permission to have medical assistance to die. Now, as the federal government appealed both the decision broadly and also Gloria Taylor's exemption. So Gloria Taylor, because she was so ill, the decision on her exemption was fast-tracked, and a panel of judges at the BC Appeal Court heard it. One judge at the BC Appeal Court heard it, Justice Nicola Prowse, and she upheld the decision that Gloria Taylor should still be given the right to die. And then the federal government appealed that as well, and before a panel of justices could hear that final hearing, Gloria died. And she died of complications of ALS in the hospital, so she was not assisted to die, but she will forever remain the first Canadian to be granted permission to have medical assistance to die. Then the case went to the BC Court of Appeal, so the overall case. And that was heard by a panel of 3 justices, and it was actually broadcast live, and you can still watch the podcast of it. It's very interesting to watch the court proceedings in that case. And the 3 justices who made the decision, it just came out very recently last month, and they overturned the decision from the BC Supreme Court. So we had the decision in Rodriguez, which said, no, you don't have the right. Then we had the decision, the first level decision from Gloria Taylor in BC that said, yes, you do. And then we had the BC Appeal Court saying, no, actually, no, you don't. So what was the basis for that decision? And the basis was something called, a legal term called stare decisis, which means no jurisdiction. Now this is a critical bit, because when we look at the BC original decision, that was really all about the facts. The question of should Gloria Taylor or should Sue Rodriguez be able to have assistance to die because of the Charter Section 15, the discrimination, essentially in Rodriguez that had already been determined. And in the Gloria Taylor case, Section 7 was added. But we had that problematic issue about Section 1. Could we allow these people to have rights that surely they should have without impacting the weak and vulnerable? And what this is a question of fact. What do the studies show? And as you can imagine, there's conflicting evidence. There's a lot of evidence that I believe is very solid, showing that the weak and vulnerable are not at risk, and others will present evidence that paints a different story. So Justice Smith had to wade through all that evidence and make a decision on the facts. Now here's a key fact about our court system, is that it is our trial judges who are primarily responsible for deciding issues of fact. And if we just close the door temporarily on the Gloria Taylor case and just think about, imagine someone's charged with break-in entry or assault, and they're at the trial. The judge is the one who's in the best position to evaluate the quality of the evidence. I mean, any of you who have children or are children or ever were children know how, when someone asks you a question, often it's your body language that gives you away, or a particular stutter. So the written evidence in itself is part of the important evidentiary record, but our courts recognize that it is also the information that is available to the judge and how the questions were answered and how the person presented that testimony that's key. And so when at the trial level, Justice Smith heard all the really conflicting testimony, is it safe, is it not safe, and had all the witnesses were, and there was witnesses from around the world, and they were cross-examined by the different counsel, and then she concluded that on balance, she was persuaded, the evidence persuaded her that it was safe, that the weak and vulnerable in Canada could be protected, while still allowing people like Sue Rodriguez and Gloria Taylor to have assistance to die. So we had that decision at the trial level. Now the BC Court of Appeal is weighing in, but their mandate isn't to examine the facts again, it's to examine questions of law. And stare decisis is a question of law. And essentially what the principle of stare decisis is that what the Supreme Court writ, only the Supreme Court can overturn. So if the Supreme Court has made a decision, only they can overturn it unless there is such compelling evidence to indicate if the law has changed so much that the Supreme Court decision is clearly no longer valid. Now, Justice Smith, in her ruling, said that she believed the law had evolved so significantly that stare decisis did not apply. In the appeal court decision, the decision was that, in fact, she had erred, that stare decisis did apply, so she had exceeded her authority by overturning a ruling of the Supreme Court of Canada. So it's I know those of us who support choice said it's sort of the softest of all possible no's. So we would have been much happier if the original decision had been upheld, but the way that it was turned down was on this question of jurisdiction, not on any question of fact or constitutional right. Also, it was a split decision. It was a 2-1 decision, and the dissenting justice, Justice James Finch, is actually has now retired, but he was the Chief Justice of BC. So he had a very significant dissent and a very stirring dissent. So now that case will ideally head to the Supreme Court of Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada gets to decide what court cases it will hear. So it's not guaranteed that they will hear it. We certainly believe that they will hear it, that this is an issue of supreme importance to Canadians, and certainly one worthy of the Supreme Court's time, but we don't know. So it could be in a week, it could be several months, we will hear whether or not the Supreme Court will hear the decision, and so rehear the case at the Supreme Court level, and then of course we'll have the Supreme Court decision. There's quite a backlog, so it will likely be 2015 at the earliest before, if the Supreme Court agrees to hear the case, before it is in fact heard. So we've got some time still for that to play out. In the meantime, we have a certain province in our country called Quebec. And Quebec, back in 2009, so actually back about the time that the Gloria Taylor case was being put together, Quebec started on a similar but separate journey. And what Quebec said is that, yep, the criminal code outlaws assisting a suicide, and that's all well and good, but let's have a provincial discussion about the matter. And so they talked about, they really did what I think is an example for all provinces in Canada, an example of textbook democracy. They started out by producing a discussion document. A select committee with individuals from all the parties in the province of Quebec got together and they put together this discussion document, and then they held meetings right across the province in 8 different cities, and they also invited submissions in writing and online. And they heard people's points of view on whether Quebec, what their views were about end-of-life choice, the idea of someone being assisted to die. And they got all that back, and then they issued a report. And the report came out in 2012, so it's a very lengthy process. And the Quebec government had heard a variety of views, and what they did is they expanded their mandate. So rather than just specifically talking about the issues of end-of-life choice, they expanded their mandate and they talked about advanced care planning, palliative care, and end-of-life choice. And they, in this report, made some really solid recommendations. Who knows what an advanced care plan is? Are you familiar with that term? Remember the case of Millett versus Schulman, where Millett had a card? An advanced care plan is that kind of an idea, but it's a formal document that you write your wishes on so that if for some reason you can't speak, that document speaks for you. Now, it doesn't matter what you say in that document. If you can speak, you will always be given the choice to communicate. No one will say, no, it doesn't matter that you want to be you want that measure. Here, look, you said and signed that you didn't. No, if you can communicate, then what you say will go. But if you can't communicate, not even by blinking an eye, then this document stands in for your wishes. So Quebec has taken the status of this document and said, we need to make sure more Quebecers have these. We need to establish a provincial registry of these, and we also need to audit hospitals to make sure they comply with them. So some really solid recommendations around advanced care planning. They also looked at the issue of palliative care. And one of the concerns that's often expressed in this area is that the idea of legalizing assisted dying is really a distraction from palliative care, that what we really need to focus on in Canada is palliative care, that only 30% of Canadians get the palliative care that they need, so that's what we should do. And so Quebec, in this same report, said, absolutely, we need to address palliative care. And they recommended that it become a right for all Canadians, a right for all Canadians. And then they went on to the more difficult and contentious issue of what had originally been called assisted suicide and euthanasia, which they called in this report medical aid in dying, medical aid in dying. And they said that in certain circumstances where there was exceptional suffering, individuals should be given, should have the option of being given medical assistance to die. And there was safeguards outlined, procedures, and different oversight mechanisms. But that was essentially the report. Now this is just a report. It has no power, but it was signed off by the select committee, so all the different parties in Quebec. And so the next stage was to say, well, okay, this is all well and good, but we have this federal rule that says assisted suicide, assisting somebody, is illegal. So how do you reconcile the two? And so Quebec then hired 3 expert lawyers to take a look at that case and say, how could this possibly be done? And they issued their report, and the answer really comes through in the language, because while Quebec isn't challenging assisted suicide in the criminal code, they say that is illegal and should be illegal. You know, imagine that you're a 19-year-old and you've just failed a midterm and you're feeling really depressed and you say, I think I should kill myself, and your buddy says, good idea, here's a gun. Okay, that's assisting a suicide, and that should be criminal. What Quebec is talking about instead is medical assistance to die. So where somebody is suffering grievously at end of life and just doesn't want to play that tape out to the end, wants to be assisted to die. So they changed the language and said, and the report said, assisted suicide is a criminal matter, which is of course governed by the federal government. Medical aid in dying, which we propose, is really part of health care. And health care is regulated provincially. So therefore, what we're going to do is pass provincial healthcare legislation that allows medical aid in dying in certain limited circumstances. And the other piece that makes this work is that while the federal government sets the criminal code, it is the provinces that administer that criminal code. So the federal government decides what is illegal, but the provinces decide who to prosecute. And in Quebec, we actually already have an example of this. There's an individual in Quebec by the name of Henry Morgentaler. Henry Morgentaler, who some of you may have heard of, and he made it his mission to perform abortions at a time when abortions were not legal in Canada. And he was charged a number of times, brought to the courts in Quebec, and something called jury nullification happened. Jury nullification. And essentially what jury nullification is when someone has clearly broken the law, but the jury refuses to convict. And so after that happened a couple of times, the government of Quebec said, well, we're not going to spend any more dollars prosecuting Morgentaler, and they allowed him to continue to run his clinic and to perform abortions. And he did that for 13 years before abortion was decriminalized in the rest of Canada. So there is a precedent for a provincial government, and particularly for the government of Quebec, to do something that is against the criminal code and decide not to prosecute. So that's the situation we have in Quebec at the moment. And the latest thing that happened in June of this year, Quebec tabled a bill. It's called Bill 52, and it's called an Act Respecting End-of-Life Care. And that act is the legal language that really takes the recommendations from the report and puts it into what could potentially be a law. And when that was presented in June, it was presented to actually a standing ovation in the National Assembly. It's called the National Assembly in Quebec. It's now going through discussion and debate. There was a vote on it, again, just been a busy month just recently, which had 75% support. It was what's called a conscience vote, so a free vote. People were free to vote not on party lines, but as their conscience dictated, and it had 75% support. Now it's gone to a committee for what's called clause-by-clause study, and they are anticipating that this could be passed by the end of this year or early next. So Quebec could legalize, under the healthcare system, medical assistance to die in that time frame. Now, hopefully, I've made kind of a compelling case for why we should have choice, and you've seen the choice video. But like anything, a thoughtful advocate needs to think about what are the reasons why we might not want it. What are the concerns? And I think we can look at the concerns as emanating from three different groups. And I think that we need to be very cautious and careful how we proceed. We may support assisted dying, but we want to make sure that this isn't something that we do that could end up harming our weak and vulnerable. So the first sort of community of folks who are concerned are those in palliative care. And they rightly point out that only 30% of Canadians have access to palliative care that could use it. And so they suggest that we should instead focus on palliative care and not on end-of-life choice. Now, a particular response to that is just to simply say that they're not mutually exclusive alternatives. What we really need is both. We need both assistance to die and the best possible palliative care available to all Canadians. And that is what Quebec has tried to do with their Bill 52. The other argument that comes from the palliative care community is that assistance to die is unnecessary, that palliative care, when it's freely available, is enough, that palliative care is enough. And if you were to meet some of the top palliative care doctors in Canada, individuals like Dr. Jose Pereira or Dr. Balfour Mount, there's probably no one that you'd rather have at your bedside if you were dying. These are very skilled doctors. They're absolutely committed to making the dying process as peaceful as they possibly can. And ultimately, if they cannot in some way quell your pain or symptoms, there's always the option of terminal palliative sedation. So is that enough? Do we really need more than that? And to answer that question, we're going to see another video of Amy Doolittle.
ALS is a very cruel disease. Mine is quite slow progressing. Why, we have no idea. I'm not sure with how this disease affects a day-to-day life that living right to the bitter end is my choice. I have lots of time to think about how my life might be, if my life has value and I can contribute, great. But there will come a point when I am a brain trapped inside a completely immovable body. I am limited in my mobility. My voice is going. I am going to die. And no debate. I have a terminal progressive illness. And those who aren't facing that really don't have a clue. How can they? I know it's still me in here, but it's not the me I want or I feel like I can be with the world. My name is Amy Doolittle, and I believe I should have a choice in deciding when I wish to die.
The palliative care community is concerned about legalizing choice. But as we can see from Amy Doolittle, sometimes it's not about pain or symptoms. Sometimes it's about quality of life. And one of the wonderful bodies of evidence that we have is the information coming out of the state of Oregon. For 15 years, end-of-life choice has been legal in Oregon, and they have published detailed statistics about who has used it. And one of the things that came out in the 2012 report from Oregon was the number, and it's come out every year, the number of individuals who use the legislation, so who take a prescription and end their lives, who were registered for palliative care, who were enrolled in palliative care either at the time of diagnosis or the time of their death. And in Oregon in 2012, 97% of those who used the legislation were enrolled in palliative care. So if palliative care was sufficient, I think we would see a very different number. Another group that has concerns is the disability community. And I think we have to pay particular attention to this group because they are righteous and justified in noting that as a group they have been discriminated against. I remember when I first started this work, meeting with one of my friends and telling her about it, and she shared with me her experience as an advocate for people with mental disabilities. She said, I would never allow a 40-year-old man with Down syndrome to go to the hospital alone. She said, if an able-bodied 40-year-old went to the hospital, let's say that that individual needed dialysis, had kidney problems, it would be no problem. They would simply be sorted. If somebody with a disability went to hospital, there is a much greater likelihood that they would be told, you've had a good life. There's not really anything that we can do for you. That discrimination, sadly, is part of our heritage in our healthcare system for people with disabilities. I did not take it lightly. But I do not believe that the best way forward for individuals in that community is to completely prohibit assisted dying. Right now, we have terminal palliative sedation. We have the ability of individuals to make decisions for others. By legalizing end-of-life choice and putting protocols around it and safeguards and making sure that there's truly consent involved, we're actually safeguarding the disability community. And the statistics bear me out. If we look at what's happened in Belgium and in the Netherlands, incidences of what's called assisted dying without explicit consent have dropped in half since legalization. So we can't close our eyes and say this is something that doesn't exist, but what we can say is the situation actually gets better once we legalize it and put controls and safeguards around it. Now, the third group that has concerns about this is individuals from particular religious communities. And it's not a particular religion or religious community. It tends to fall along lines of liberalism versus conservatism. So the more liberal religious tend to support it, and the more conservative, in some cases, tend to oppose it. Although we have, for example, a Catholic theologian, Hans Kung, who's recently spoken out in support of it. But in general, we see a liberal religious support and those who are more conservative opposing. And I have no issue whatsoever with someone deciding that based on their religion or their moral or spiritual outlook or practices, that this is not something that they would choose for themselves. That's absolutely should be and must always be their right. And similarly, a doctor who is a member of a particular religious faith or a particular moral values needs to have the right of whether this is something that they choose to participate in. But where I take issue is where somebody from a particular religious viewpoint tries to use the power of legislation to prevent me, who has a different outlook, from having my choices. And now what's exciting is we're starting to see people from religious communities supporting that. For example, David Giuliano, the very Reverend David Giuliano, who's the former moderator or the former head of the United Church of Canada, had spoken out, and he said, I don't think that this would ever be a choice I would want. I think that even in dying, there would be an opportunity for me to deepen spiritually. But who am I to say to someone else that they can't have this choice? And similarly, a man in the US, a fellow by the name of Daniel Lee, who's an evangelical Christian, said, I'm absolutely opposed to this, but it is not my decision to impose my views on others. Language matters. The way that we ask a question has a significant impact on the likelihood of the outcome. If we were to ask people, do you think that you would like this operation? It has a 90% chance of success. And how many of you, this operation will enhance your life, it has a 90% chance of success, how many would take the operation? Okay? And if I say same operation, there's a 10% chance that you will die. Okay? The way that we ask questions really matters, and it certainly matters in this issue. Here's a study that was done, well, actually just two different polls that were done. And in one, people were asked, do you think Canadians should be able to have assistance, should doctors be able to assist Canadians to suicide, assist to suicide? And 2/3 of Canadians said yes. When a poll with slightly different wording, but the same intention, do you think Canadians should have the right to be assisted? Should a doctor be able to assist a patient to end their life? 80% of Canadians said yes. So a 20% difference in what is fundamentally the same question. Language matters. I remember it was a typical fall morning. I was getting ready for work when the phone rang. My husband asked me if I'd seen the news. I watched the news over and over again that September morning as 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers. There's another scene that I keep replaying in my mind. Many people that were at the Twin Towers that day were able to successfully escape. Others were trapped. Their evacuation routes were cut off. And as they waited individually or in groups in their offices, they made a hellish choice. Did they wait until the flames and the smoke took their lives? Or did they grab a chair or some other object, smash through the glass, and jump to certain death below? Many people that day jumped. Were those individuals suicidal? Not on your life. In the same way, when we use the word suicide to talk about people who are facing the prospect of a horrific death and have a grievous illness, we do them a tremendous disservice. And some people will argue against me and say, but the dictionary says suicide is the action of intentionally killing oneself. This must be suicide. When I was in my younger days in the schoolyard, we used to call each other retards. That was the language that we used. And technically, the definition of retard is there. Nevertheless, it's language that we don't use today because we know it is pejorative. When we talk about individuals, we talk about people that may be developmentally delayed. Language matters. Similarly to knife. A knife is a verb. You can knife someone, you apply a knife to. A knife could be any number of things. It could even be a scalpel. Calling medically assisted dying suicide is very much like calling surgery a knife attack. Language matters. And it matters for a number of reasons. We saw the poll results. And poll results matter because they can influence our legislators. They can influence how we think as a society. They may even influence the justices on our courts. Language matters to the individuals who are personally involved. Suicide has a stigma to it. Family members of somebody who wants assistance to die, to be told that their family member suicided or wants to kill themselves, and caregivers who might otherwise want to be involved are going to be affected by the stigma of that language. And finally, there is a financial impact. Many insurance policies have an exclusionary clause for suicide. They do not pay if death was due to suicide. We saw a case in British Columbia where a man was dying of cancer. His body was riddled with it, and he was suffering greatly. He went to the edge of his property, took out his gun, and shot himself. When the family applied for insurance benefits, they were told no. There was an exclusionary clause that prevented a payout for suicide. Now, the family challenged the ruling, and they were successful. They were told that, in fact, the death was cancer, not suicide, and the insurance company was ordered to pay. Language matters. In medically assisted dying, we believe that where individuals are suffering grievously at end of life and facing the prospect of a horrific death, that they should have the compassionate option to have assistance to die. At Dying with Dignity, we're a charity that's been around for 30 years, trying to do two things: improve quality of dying and expand end-of-life choices. We improve quality of dying by working with people right here, right now in our current situations. We talked about advanced care planning. If you don't have an advanced care plan, go to our website and download the form. It's a free form. You can download it. It's in the resource section. Fill it out. Do you know the case of Terri Schiavo? Is that something that people have heard of? She was a woman with an eating disorder, and at, I think, the age of, she was in her 20s. She was young. She went into her body, she went into a coma. She was kept alive in a persistent vegetative state for a decade. If she had, her husband said she would not have wanted that, but she had no written evidence. An advanced care plan will keep you from being in that situation if that's what you choose. We also advocate for patient rights, individuals who are not having their rights to refuse treatment or informed consent to be respected. We help them. And finally, we work today with people who are at end of life. Amy Doolittle was one of our clients, so that people who are suffering grievously and want another option, we help them within the limits of our current law to understand their choices and their options and try to have a peaceful death. And finally, we educate, as I'm doing today, about the reasons why we think medically assisted dying should be legalized in Canada. So on that note, on this note, there is some suffering, only death can end. I will open for questions.
I'm going to hit the mic for a minute just to remind people that we do need to get your voice through a microphone, amplified so everyone can hear, but also so that we can get the questions out to the people who are watching through the live cast and also who will be watching in the archive. So anyone who has questions, please just make your way to the microphone. We can form an orderly line there for people to ask their questions. And if anyone does need a microphone brought to them, we also have one up here, and we are happy to do that if you wanted to raise your hand.
I'm just going to grab the water. I actually went on Reddit and did an Ask Me Anything, so nothing that you say will faze me, including what I had for lunch today.
Hello, my name is Mark Stoiko. I'm faculty in the business school, and I'm also a volunteer at Dorothy Lay Hospice. On 2 occasions, you used the expression dying too early, dying one day too early. Would you please clarify that for us?
Can you remind me the context of when I used that language?
No, I can't.
Okay. With Sue Rodriguez? Not wanting to die too early, is that what I said? Okay.
Not wanting to die one day too early.
Right, yeah. So right now, one of the tragedies of our current laws is that people who imagine they cannot live with their particular future end up taking matters into their own hands. And so they ask for assistance. They would, if they had the option, ask for assistance to die when they're ready to go. But what happens is because they know they don't have that ability to ask for assistance. And we see this all the time in our client support program. So let me just expand a little bit. Nagy Morkos was a man with Huntington disease, and he had nursed his father with the same disease. He knew what his future was like, and he didn't want to go there. Because he knew he couldn't have assistance to die, when he was ready to go, he decided to end his life while he could still do everything himself. Because the last thing he wanted to do was to ask his wife or someone that he loved to help him and put him potentially at risk, put them at risk of 14 years in jail. So last year, on Earth Day, Nagy ended his life. It was far too early. It wasn't a day too early. It was months too early. And here's the thing, because what we know from studies is that what people think they can't bear, they often can. People have a really hard difficulty imagining their futures. And studies have shown over and over that people draw lines in the sand and say, okay, if I got to that place, I wouldn't want to live. I wouldn't find meaning. I wouldn't find value. And yet they get there and they say, okay, I can't see, I can't hear, but I can feel the sunshine on my face. I can hug my grandchildren. And they still find incredible meaning and value in life. So one of the tragedies of our current laws is that people do die too early because they can't have assistance to die when they're truly ready. And what we know from Oregon is that 40% of the people who get the prescription to end their lives, they're like Gloria Taylor. They never use it. What they want is that peace of mind, and then they're able to go right through to a natural death. That was a very long answer to your question. You look like you might have a follow-up.
Well, a follow-up insofar as terminal palliative sedation, correct? Yeah, so
Yes.
how is it that terminal palliative sedation does not meet the requirements of dying with dignity?
So are you asking me, since we have terminal palliative sedation, why do we still need more than that?
No, I'm not asking that question. What I'm asking is, how does it not meet the requirements of dying with dignity? Because that appears to be a mission. Dying with dignity is a mission, and we have an instrument called terminal palliative sedation.
Let me try to answer your question, and let me know if I don't. So again, I need to just step back and give a little bit of context. What does it mean to die with dignity? And that's our mandate. I would flip that over to you and say, what does that mean for you to die with dignity? That's a very intensely personal matter, and it's up to you and every individual as they face death in terms of what will give them meaning and dignity. And so for some people, they will get intense dignity and value and satisfaction from facing suffering, and that will be a very dignified end for them. And for other people, they will say it's about autonomy or it's about control. There are not wrong answers to that. It's a personal values question. So when you ask me, how does palliative terminal sedation not meet the criteria of dying with dignity? It does. If that's something that you want to do and that's an option for you, then I fully support that, and I think we should make that option widely available. But I would add that, first of all, terminal palliative sedation is something that's only generally available in the last couple of weeks of life. So when you have somebody like Sue Rodriguez or Gloria Taylor, who faces a long decline, or Nagy Morkos, who face months of decline, they're not eligible for terminal palliative sedation. But even beyond that, imagine that they were. How can we as a society say, okay, we can render somebody unconscious and remove food and water and allow their family to watch them dehydrate to death, and that's allowable and humane. But to provide them with an injection that gives them a peaceful death with their family and friends gathered, that's not. I think that's an artificial line.
Thank you for your address.
Or not. Just a quick personal question for you. Just wondering what led you to devoting so much of your life to this work.
Excellent. Are there any other chartered accountants? Anybody here studying to be a chartered accountant? Anybody know somebody in business? There we go. Yeah, it's not the typical career path for a chartered accountant. In fact, I actually have a talk called From Chartered Accountant to Social Activist that maybe we'll save that for another time. As many people who got involved with this, I've had a personal story. One of the first, as an accountant, what you do as a chartered accountant is you audit. And one of the audits I had way back in the day was in long-term care facilities. And it was a 2-week audit, and I would go to these beautiful buildings and walk in and be met by the smell of bleach and hospital food and despair. And every night I went home and I wept. And I really believed there had to be a better way, but I didn't do anything. And then about a decade ago, my father-in-law in England had Alzheimer's, dementia. We didn't at the time know it was Alzheimer's. And I didn't know this about Alzheimer's, but one of the side effects can be that somebody gets very aggressive. And this kind, gentle, loving man started to swear and to hit people. And my husband went over to England and talked with his brother, and what can we possibly do? And we know, they knew their dad never wanted to be in a care home. That was the last thing that he wanted to do. He was fiercely independent. But they just didn't have a choice. He couldn't be cared for at home anymore. And then in the care home, he continued to deteriorate physically as well. So he'd had some various leg infections, and he was walking first with a cane and then a walker and then a wheelchair. So there he was in the care home in the wheelchair, and the dementia was also progressing. And so he started to take the wheelchair and run it into furniture and into staff and into other residents. And the care staff didn't know what to do. They didn't have any choices. So they took the handles of his wheelchair and suspended them on a windowsill, so that when he tried to move the wheelchair, he was stuck. And then when he crawled down from the wheelchair, they strapped him to it. And that's how he spent the last weeks of his life. And that's what my husband saw when he visited him for the last time. And he came home and he said, "You must never, ever let that happen to me." And I really love my husband, so here I am. But the interesting thing is that, well, that's what got me into this work and into this job. It was a little bit of false pretenses, because what we are advocating for isn't support for people with dementia. And instead, if I had known then what I know now, he would have had a really different death. Because at the same time as the dementia was progressing, he was on a number of medications. He had these very severe leg infections and was treated with course after course of antibiotics. Every year he had a flu shot. We as Canadians have the right to refuse treatment. And as his substitute decision makers, I mean, even in England, we could have refused that treatment, and he could have died a natural death from the infection rather than the prolonged death that he had with the dementia. And just as a case in point, I mentioned our former Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau. He was diagnosed with cancer. He had a very treatable form of cancer, and he declined to have it treated because he also was diagnosed with dementia. And he thought the worst thing would be to recover from the cancer and then have a prolonged death with dementia. On our website, there's all kinds of information about your rights as a patient, and I hope I have piqued your interest and that you will go check them out, and so that nobody you love has to suffer unnecessarily. And there's another long answer to a short question. Yes, please.
Sorry. My question, there's two parts to it. Sorry, echo. My question is, how do you present this information to other people, like high schools and whatnot? Because I feel like I didn't know about this website. I feel like I don't. And I find that it's a little difficult because people don't have that advanced care plan set out for some of these kids or some of these people. And of course, you know, when a kid gets in the hospital, they can't just say, "Oh, I'm a Jehovah's Witness," or "Oh, I don't believe in this." And, you know, they get there and then, you know, their rights are proven wrong. Now, do you guys do this outside other than colleges, or do you do it in high schools?
Wow, that sounds like an invitation. Our mandate is education and about patient rights, about advanced care planning, absolutely critical, as well as about the case for legalization. And we actually have a full speakers bureau of folks that speak. So if your college or high school was interested in having somebody speak, we could even fix you up with one of our under 35 volunteers, as our average age is a little bit older than that. So absolutely, but just to be clear, there are different rules that apply if you're not an adult. So what we talk about, these decisions, these are for individuals that are 18 and over. Under the age of 18, then it's a different ballgame. And so, you know, it's important, I think, to know about advanced care planning, but at that point, you're not having the same ability to make decisions.
The only other question I had was with the euthanasia. I'm sorry I call it that because I'm a vet tech on top of being a practical nurse. Haha. Anyway, my question is because of this, like, is it yet by law that they're allowed? Like, I'm still trying to keep up with you and with this conversation. Is it allowed now that we are allowed to have medically assisted dying or care aid dying, or no?
So the quick answer to that is no. You can get information, you can get emotional support, and that is what Dying with Dignity offers through what's called our client support program. So if you ever, and hopefully not, but ever knew somebody that was facing the prospect of a horrific death and wanted to know their options, then we do have a program of support. But it is not legal. It's disallowed by the criminal code to either counsel somebody to suicide or to aid or abet, which generally means to provide the means or to physically assist. Now that's maybe changing in Quebec, and we'll see how that happens, and maybe changing in Canada, but that is the law today.
Thank you.
Okay. And actually a word on language on euthanasia, because we talk about medically assisted dying, but sometimes people say, well, what does that mean? So we talk about that meaning the ability to receive a prescription medication that the individual takes themselves, or voluntary euthanasia. And with that adjective, we make it clear that it's something that somebody requests and is given to them. So voluntary euthanasia, or so medication either self-administered or administered by somebody else at the individual's specific request.
Thank you.
There's a microphone there. I'm sure they want you to see. Oh, and we've got one traveling. But
okay. Hi. Thanks. You mentioned that in 2012, this is the Oregon stats, I think 97% of people who used assisted dying were also in palliative care. I'm wondering, and you may not know, but I'm wondering in terms of Oregon where there is assisted dying, people that may have degenerative, so ALS, Huntington's, if there are stats on, people taking advantage of that before they reach the stages of, last weeks of life.
okay, great question, and I'm going to give you another longish answer. There's two models in the world. I mentioned there's 8 places where end-of-life choice is legalized. There's really 2 ways in which that happens. And one is what's happened in Oregon, Washington State, and most recently Vermont, where an individual has to be terminal ill with a diagnosis of 6 months or less to live. So they're very close to end of life. And the remedy that they get is a prescription. So they are given a prescription which they can take themselves. So somebody with ALS, somebody with Huntington, unlikely, first of all, they won't be within 6 months of end of life, and by the time they want to go, they're unable to take the medication. So typically what we see, and the details in Oregon are fascinating, it's mostly cancer patients. That's the by far the largest group, and they're usually people within a few days or a week or so of end of life, tend to be very close to end of life. Now, the other model, so that was sort of what's been in the past called the North American model, is the European model, which we see in the Netherlands and in Belgium. And in the European model, you have a broader range. So first of all, in terms of who's eligible for support, it's not that 6 months, which is a little bit of an arbitrary line and can be difficult to estimate. A doctor will say, beyond several weeks, it's very hard to predict how long someone will live. So rather than trying to predict based on a timeline, they say that an individual has to have unbearable suffering, a grievous illness, no remedy acceptable to them. So that is really a horrendous situation, but it's not tied to a particular time period. So ALS or Huntington could qualify. And then in terms of the remedy, it can be a prescription, but it's more often the administration of medication.
You mean at the time that they choose?
At the time of their choosing, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, but maybe sorry, you can go, but I'll just say that in Canada, to put into context now where we are going, the Carter case in BC is much along the same lines of the European model. So the idea of unbearable suffering and the remedy being either a prescription or someone administering the medication. And Quebec, again, is along the same lines, unbearable suffering at end of life, advanced state of weakened capacity, so very close to end of life, and the remedy being the assistance to die, so the prescription, or the legislation tends to talk more about the medication being administered.
Okay, so we had a question in the front here, and then we'll get to you, and then that's probably all the time that we have.
In your presentation, you made reference to how language matters, and you kind of stressed that. Do you believe that if the language was brought up differently in the cases of Sue and Gloria, that it might have turned out differently? or that it might have been resolved sooner?
Yes. You know, you can't say that you support assisted suicide without saying that you support suicide. And it's embedded in the words. And psychological studies have shown that even if we say something is not so, like imagine that you're kids and you say to your kid, no water pistols in the house. What does the kid hear? Water pistols in the house. So even though we're saying, you know, it's not suicide, because we put an adjective in front of it, assisted suicide, and suicide is still there, it's very pervasive. I mean, the poll results are compelling. The Sue Rodriguez decision was really close. It was 5-4. I think there's I mean, who knows, but could that have swayed it? Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we ask our supporters to do is whenever they hear language such as assisted suicide being used, to write to the press, to write to the media, and to challenge them on that and say that's not appropriate language to really characterize what we're talking about here.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is, well, I wasn't here from the beginning, but from what I heard, you keep stressing on dying with dignity. So are you suggesting that the only way to die with dignity is to have assisted suicide?
No, not at all. Not for an instant, not for a heartbeat. Dying with dignity is a personal choice. And I think that anybody should have the right to choose to die in a way that is appropriate for them.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, for your questions, and thank you so much, Wanda, for coming and speaking to us today. We invite everyone to stay for a reception, for some food, and of course, there's more time to chat with Wanda in a more informal way after the talk. Thank you all for coming.